inserts new section 239, amending section 1E of the Foreshore Act of 1933 is inserted by section 175 of the Maritime Area Planning Act 2021, the MAP Act. This amendment is intended to provide a pathway for existing...
Sorry, Minister, apologies for interrupting. I'm just checking, this is chapter...
This is part 13 of the amendments.
289.
Yes, yeah.
No, thank you.
Apologies. This amendment is to provide a pathway for existing foreshore applications received by the Minister under the Foreshore Act 1933 to move to a new regulatory system in the interest of maximising the opportunities available in a more modern consenting structure as provided in the MAP Act. Under the new provisions proposed in this amendment, MARA may, at the request of the Minister or the applicant on its own initiative, take over a licence application made under the Foreshore Act of 1933. If MARA does so, any determination that has already been made in relation to the application under the European Community's Birds and Natural Habitats Regulations 2011 can be adopted by MARA to avoid duplication of effort and delay in handling the application. The ability to transfer applications on hand to MARA will help limit the period where a dual consenting structure remains in place and will assist in expediting the winding down of the existing foreshore consenting regime. The benefit of the applicant to the applicant is that his or her existing application can be treated more expeditiously under a more modern, streamlined legislative system. An application cannot be transferred to MARA if a material change is being made to the application, as will then constitute a new application that must be made afresh. Similarly, if information provided in the application is more than 2 years out of date, it cannot be transferred. If MARA is unable to accept an application, it will continue to be dealt with under existing foreshore consenting regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Gould.
Minister, apologies, no, but okay, in layman's terms, I know you've outlined that if there's a material change or if the information is 2 years out of date, but what will these changes actually mean? I suppose, what are the key differences between MARA, between the MARA processes and these applications from that of the foreshore unit?
Well, really, the difference, significant difference is it's very much a much more streamlined process, and so the prioritisation of certain applications as agreed by government has meant that other applications on hand have had to be paused. And this amendment provides a pathway for paused applications to move to MARA to be dealt with more efficiently as the foreshore system continues to wind down. And the advantage to the applicant is that he or she will, if the application is granted, obtain a more modern maritime area consent rather than a lease or a licence.
And how do the timeframes differ?
I think the timeframes would, I would imagine it is a much more streamlined process, and I think it's just to give certainty to the applicant and to move to a much more streamlined consenting regime.
And for public participation then, or judicial reviews, does it shorten the window for it shortens the window from judicial reviews from 3 months to 8 weeks?
No, there's no change there in terms of.
There's no change.
No change there.
Okay. I suppose we're concerned at the risk of exemptions under the MAP Act being used in conjunction with the provision which will result in less regulatory oversight on activities which previously would have had a much more extensive assessment under the foreshore regime. I suppose, can you address our concerns and ensure that safeguards are in place?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, there would be no diminution of that in terms of. I mean, will still be the case. The legislative obligations around EIA and appropriate assessment would remain unchanged. So the effect of amendment is to provide, Amendment 291 is to provide, where a licence has already been issued in respect of a proposed development, additional consent under the provision introduced in the Maritime Area Planning Act is not required as long as an EIA or AA have already been carried out. So there's no changes being made to EIA or AA provisions themselves. So I think this is, there's absolutely, just give assurance there's no change there in regard to that.
And in relation to the public being notified when an offshore application transferred to MARA, so they understand who's handling it and the timeframes involved for public participation and decision-making. On what basis would the Minister request the transfer? I suppose just on that one, in relation to public notification of the movement of applications for MARA from the foreshore application.
Again, there's no change in relation to that. The public notifications would be in place in relation to that.
Okay, and on what basis would the Minister request the transfer, or MARA to do the transfer? Like, who's going to be consulted in this?
Yeah, it is the intention that there will be consultation, public consultation in relation to it. Absolutely. And under the principles of ARAS as well.
And that will be included?
Yes.
Okay. In relation then to where decisions are published on the decisions that the Minister or Mayor to transfer to an offshore application, like where would people see that?
Again, we can go back with clarification on that particular question, if that's okay.
Okay. I suppose, yeah, I must say, Minister, these, like, I should have probably stated this at the start, that this is not the way to bring forward these amendments, to be tagging it on at the end of a very comprehensive piece of legislation that we've just gone through there now, and that there has been hours spent on. And like, we're looking at proper pre-legislative scrutiny, like to bring these amendments forward like this, we believe is bad legislation. Like, there may be things here now that we haven't had the time to scrutinise properly at this committee. And what we're doing now is at the last minute, just before a recess, that we're bringing forward these very complex, this is very complex amendments to different acts, a number of different acts. And like, I'm looking here now, and we've engaged with people, we've looked at it ourselves, and I suppose we want to ensure that the legislation does get the proper scrutiny it deserves. And so, like, Minister, just on that, like, do you recognise that this type of bringing amendments forward is not the way to be doing things? Or like, some of these bills are only months old, if not, they're very new legislation that we're bringing in changes so quickly on.
Sorry, Minister, just for the record, there was a comprehensive briefing for committee members where actually these amendments under Part 13, proposed amendments, were gone through line by line, and there was a good briefing on it. Minister, to respond, please.
But just in that, Chair, just to clarify that, there was a briefing, but these amendments haven't gone through the proper pre-legislative scrutiny. They should have been included in the original bills, or if not, there should be a standalone piece of legislation. We're tacking it on, like, at the end here. I would consider that, and I appreciate what you said, there was a line by line, but no disrespect, even some of the officials, this is really complex stuff. Am I not wrong there?
But amendments don't go through pre-legislative scrutiny. Amendments are get discussed.
But if they were included in the original, if they were included in the original legislation, they would have gone through pre-legislative.
So look, we're making really good progress. We have a couple more amendments to go through. I'm going to let the Minister to respond, and I'll go to the question then, okay?
Yeah, I note the concerns you've raised, but given the difficulties that have arisen in enabling a smooth transition from the existing foreshore consent process to the new regime under the MAP Act, I took the earliest opportunity to bring forward amendments to enable applications already underway to be dealt with in the most appropriate way. MARA becomes operational on July 17th, and clarity on the transition of applications on hand and part consented applications from the foreshore regime will be welcome in order to facilitate MARA in giving a full effect to its functions. So waiting for a separate bill later in the year with MARA already established and the board in a position to accept applications for permission would not be in the interest of the state, given the urgency of the climate crisis that we're in. And we have shown that before we're not afraid to move things forward when required to do so. And again, just to give additional assurance just around statutory consultation, Consultation is encouraged through the various legislative and consultation mechanisms, and this includes consultation on the National Marine Planning Framework, representations made on the Marine Planning Policy Statement, consultations facilitated through the Public Participation Statement, requirements on DMAPs, right through the project level consultation with On Board Penala or the Coastal Planning Authorities on specific projects. So there's a wide range of opportunity there for public to consult, and again, all of this is Archaeological compliant, I think. So just to give assurance to the Deputy in that regard. Okay.
Yes, Deputy Gould,
yeah. Yeah, Minister, yeah, can I say, we know we need to act. We know that the climate crisis is an emergency that has to be tackled. And we want to support the government when it comes, like I spoke in the chamber yesterday, you were there yourself. We want to have action. We know we need to do, we know offshore wind is a vital cog in that, but we also have the maritime area protection. That's why I'm just nervous about rushing stuff like this. But like, we want to support the government when it comes to climate change and it comes to renewable energy and trying to meet our targets. So I want to say, Minister, we want to support you on that, and we know you're really genuine on it, you know, and we recognise that. But it's just that, like, I have a few other questions here. I suppose one of them, then, I suppose, Minister, is in plain English. Can you explain why there appears to be a dual requirement under both the Foreshore and the Planning Acts, and what restrictions, what distinctions there are between the two different consents?
I suppose just to address the first point you raised, and you know, I think you know, you're correct in saying that the scale of the crisis that we're facing requires us to act, and act urgently, but act appropriately as well. And you know, I recognise the leadership shown by Sinn Féin during the vote yesterday on the nature restoration regulation. So that is acknowledged, and you know, I think similarly here in relation to this, just to, you know, I think it is critically important. You know, the public consultation that you mentioned, and I think all of that right the way through is significant as well. And just the type of development that is subject to a licence under the MAP Act differs to the licence under the Foreshore Act. So Schedule 7 of the MAP Act specifies that maritime usages that may be undertaken pursuant to a licence. Usages include marine environmental surveys for the purposes of scientific discovery or research, marine environmental services for the purpose of site investigation, installation of navigational markings, and the installation of non-permanent platforms, platoons or slipways. So a licence under the Foreshore Act is generally issued for the development that does not require exclusive occupation of the foreshore. Examples would include repair work, some coastal protection work, undersea pipelines, cables, site investigation works, dredging works, and harvesting of wild seaweed. It may include development that requires an environmental impact assessment, and as a result it applied to a broader range of development than which is licensable under the MAP Act. A licence under the MAP Act cannot be granted for development or maritime usages that require an environmental impact assessment. So all maritime usages that require an EIA must apply for planning permission. You mentioned as well, Deputy, the upcoming legislation in relation to marine protected areas. We've consistently stated that, you know, both aren't mutually exclusive, and I do think that what we are doing is we've put in a planning and regulatory regime for the maritime area for the first time that is comprehensive, and similarly with the marine protected area legislation, we're building in a robustness there around marine protected areas, around public consultation, and you know, they're not effectively lines on maps. They will be, you know, it is an iterative process. And I do think the opportunity for this committee to discuss, we've had very good feedback from this committee in relation to that. So we are confident that both can be, you know, the offshore ambition can be in harmony with our ambition around marine protected areas as well.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Yeah, just on that, Minister, and I think that's what everyone wants to see. Everyone wants to see the maritime areas protected, but at the same time being able to deliver offshore wind, and also to protect our fishers, to ensure. So what we're trying to do here, and I think what we all want to do is make sure that we can all work together to come up with the best way forward that will hopefully protect everyone and ensure delivery. There was another question I had there, Minister, and I suppose it comes into what is meant by the phrase, and there's a section, and it says, the section further provides that an environmental impact assessment and or an appropriate assessment must have been carried out before the issue of the licence, and that, and this is the section, the provision of the licence shall be deemed to apply to the development as a whole. So just that the provision of the licence shall be deemed to apply to the development as a whole. Sorry. So what is...
What line is that, Deputy Good?
Section 6, is it? Do you know what this would also, I suppose, there's a legal issue there in relation to a case, is this
the live case now, please don't mention it. If it's subdued, say don't mention it, please.
So, I suppose, just go back to this line, so, the provision of a licence shall be deemed to apply to the development as a whole.
Yes, so it just in accordance with the EU and Irish case law, where an EIA directive is carried out, it must encompass the entire project. So if the original EIA has not considered the entirety of the project, notwithstanding that the consent may have only been for part of the project, then the disapplication provided for in these amendments simply can't apply. So if an EIA is carried out at all in the original consent and one was required, then this amendment wouldn't apply. So safeguards have been built in to ensure compliance with the EIA directive.
And there's also a reference, to consent of the landowner being the land in the maritime area. But what about the consent in respect of the maritime, the marine itself, and how the state and the public's interests will be properly addressed?
Yeah, and again, this is all governed under the Maritime Area Planning Act, and in terms of the, we mentioned specifically the marine protected areas, that legislation is still to come. There's, governance around designated sites around special protected areas for birds or SSCs. So all of that, the regulatory regime and the legal basis for that is already in place.
Okay,
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Minister. Okay, so I'm going to put the question now, the Amendment 189, that the new section be there inserted. Is that agreed?